Hi everyone. We are now going to review Chapter 10, Caribbean Islanders and South Americans. We're going to concentrate today on Caribbean Islanders. Okay, so just to start off, Latinos from the Caribbean islands in South America, they seem quite different from each other because their homelands will vary from the tropics to snow-capped mountains. Their ethnic backgrounds are Native American, Spanish, Portuguese, French, British, Danish, Dutch, African, Asian, Indian, Chinese, Italian, German, and Japanese. They have all these influences mixed together, but there is some similarities. There are some commonalities. The dishes with native ingredients and foods were introduced from Europe, Africa, and Asia. Okay, so there's that going on, and there is a preference for strong, spicy flavors. Okay, so here's the region we're talking about. Um, right now, it's just the Caribbean. All right, so let's take a look. Cuba is the largest of the island. There are more than 1,000 tropical islands that are going to stretch from Florida to Venezuela. They are uniformly scenic, okay, with tropical warmth and torrential rains that provide an ideal climate for lush plant cover and numerous indigenous fruits and vegetables. All of these islands share a history of domination by foreign powers and the subsequent political turmoil. And the mixture, the interrelationships, and indeed the intermarriage of Native Indians, Europeans, Africans, and Asians have produced an extremely diverse population. Okay, so the largest group of Hispanic population are in America are residents of Puerto Rico, followed by Cuba and the Dominican Republic. Okay, Puerto Rican citizens of Puerto Rico are actually U.S. citizens as well. So over half of the population of Puerto Rico live in the United States. And the number of Puerto Ricans living in New York is almost double that of living in the main capital city of San Juan. The majority of Cubans came to America after Fidel Castro overthrew Batista. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And we'll get into a little bit about the Dominican Republics here as well. Okay, so um, there were four immigrant groups from the Dominicans. The Trujillo era, they were political dissidents. Post Trujillo, they were just a trickle due to improved conditions. Then we had the Flotilla group, they were escaping oppressive poverty. And those who have left since, they are better educated, seeking employment opportunities here in the United States. Now, immigrants from the Caribbean vary in both economic and educational attainment. Okay, so the majority of Cubans came to the U.S. after Fidel Castro, like I said, overthrew Batista in 59. Most of the initial 150,000 were from the upper socioeconomic group. They were fleeing the constrictions of communism. We're going to address that again when we get to food intake and then once again with counseling, things like that. The airlifts from 1965 to 73 increased that number to 700,000. And the Mariel boat lift in 1980 brought another 100,000. Okay, so which is fine because there's no U.S. quota on immigrants from Cuba. Okay, let's talk a little bit about socioeconomic status. Okay, that's going to vary. 28% of all Puerto Ricans live in poverty, and higher than the general white and Hispanic population. It is a situation where free travel between the mainland, which is the United States, and the island may actually hamper socioeconomic improvement, right? If you're not steady in one place or the other, it's going to be difficult. And second generation Puerto Ricans living outside of New York City actually are doing better economically because they are attaining higher education. In New York City, the Puerto Ricans fill that gap that are left by the African Americans who are moving up. Now, the Cubans have a higher median income than the non-Hispanic whites. It should be noted that Cubans came to America as political refugees. Okay, so their immigration was not by choice. Okay, it was by necessity. Many were from, as I mentioned, a higher socioeconomic standing. And even though they lost everything, they brought with them these values of the importance of education and financial success. Dominicans have the same median earnings as other Hispanics, but less than the U.S. population. It's important to note here that the African heritage of some Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, Jamaicans, and Haitians open them to the biases that are felt towards African Americans, which they have not themselves experienced in their own homelands. Good. Okay, so let's take a look at worldview. Ethnic identity is strong, okay, within the communities in the United States. Spanish is probably going to be spoken at home. Caribbeans are more likely to use English as their first language. In terms of religion, the majority of Caribbean islanders are Roman Catholic. However, the role of the Catholic Church is less important in the Caribbean than in other regions of Latin America and less significant to immigrants to this country. Although, among Caribbean islanders, the Dominicans have a higher rate of adherence to Catholicism. That's about 95%. There are other religions practiced on the islands: Protestantism, Judaism, Voodoo is a religion. It's a mixture of African tribal rituals and Catholicism, and there doesn't seem to be any sort of a problem with that. There in Cuba and Puerto Rico, the mixture is known as Santeria. It's and in the Jamaica, Rastafari is an Afro-Caribbean faith that is indigenous there. It promotes a natural, simple lifestyle typified by bare feet, loose clothing, dreadlocks, and sacramental use of marijuana. Um, Due to its opposition to traditional government and its push to return to Africa, it is also seen as a political movement. In terms of the family, the Puerto Rican family is based on something called um, compadrazgo. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, godparents are all considered immediate family, and they're responsible for the care of the children. Men, for the most part, are the head of the household. Women maintain the home. Men are aggressive. Women are traditionally reserved. Age is respected. Elders are honored. And duty to the family is extremely important. We do have a little difference with the Dominicans due to women working more outside of the home and children getting greater autonomy. Roles are changing a little bit there. Okay, so let's take this is Santeria. And now let's take a look at the worldview. Traditional health beliefs and practices. Many Caribbean islanders believe illness is a punishment from God and fate determines life and death. We will revisit that during counseling when that also comes into play. So prayer, candles to saints, laying on of the hands is important to not just maintain health, but to cure any kind of disease. Haitians recognize many blood irregularities, So we have something called the fables, which is anemia, which is cured by eating red meat. And then we have sezisman, which is a disruption of the blood flow due to trauma, and it's treated with relaxation and cold drinks. So once again, we have this sort of like hot cold, and we will be talking more about that in a little bit. Haitians regard two types of illnesses. So there's natural illness, which is due to just a poor diet, and supernatural illness, which is due to angry spirits or mal de ojo. Okay, we've talked about that. And Paco, Susto, Nervios. They're all known by different names within the different Caribbean countries, but they're all very important here. The Dominicans do have an informal system of going to older women, okay? So that could be the abuelas, they can be the madres and things like that. And these healers will consult with the Catholic saints. We do see big use of herbal teas, over-the-counter drugs to relieve symptoms. Good hygiene and sleep are important to overall health. Okay, so let's take a look at traditional food habits. Okay, Caribbean food habits are very similar. They're influenced by all these different cultures, right? The same cultures that came and influenced everything else about the island. Basic diets are the same. There are regional variations. You should know that tourism between the islands has, come up with popular dishes from one island that is now being exported to all the other islands in the hopes of pushing more tourism. Indigenous foods include fresh fruits and vegetables originally from Central South America. Once again, cassava, avocados, bananas, plantains, papayas, tropical fruits. Chili peppers are very popular. And with the abundance of fresh fruits and vegetables, cooking techniques are really underdeveloped, right? So they're falling back in terms of animal proteins. They will be cooking them, either grilling them or in a pit. Okay? So, not to upset anyone, but Christopher Columbus viewed the West Indies as paradise on earth. Okay, so let's take a look at these traditional foods. A lot of them were mentioned. Legumes are a staple food, most often in a dish called rice and peas. So red, black beans, black-eyed peas, all prepared with lard and salt, keep reappearing. The favored beverages are coffee with rum, and juices. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about rum coming up. Okay, in terms of rum being the most popular beverage, in terms of it's the most important beverage based on molasses, and it's unique to each island. Okay, so molasses was crucial to development of these islands in the 17th and 18th centuries and played a major role, unfortunately, in the slave trade. Coffee is still the most popular beverage. Regional variations: butters preferred by French-dominated areas, lard by the Spanish-dominated areas. In Puerto Rico, we have food seasoned, fried and large, with starchy foods consumed with each meal. Pork is the favored meat with some seafood, but not a lot. So we're talking about shrimp and lobster. And finger food is a specialty. In Cuba, black beans are prominent with starches, so beef and pork are also popular. And in urban areas, there's obviously an Asian influence. Dominican Republic, stews are a specialty with starches such as rice and beans. Jamaica, seafood, curried goat, coconut milk are used in the foods. In Haiti, banana stuffed chicken, curried meat, and cornmeal mush with rice, or even something called a black rice, which is made with mushroom broth. The actual mushrooms are not eaten. Okay, let's talk about meal composition and cycle. Most typical aspect is emphasis on starchy vegetables with some meat, poultry, and fish served with rice and beans, as mentioned. More meats and foreign dishes are consumed by the wealthy. We know that, okay? Meats have a tendency to be grilled, fried, and then caramelized in sugar. A soup could be served in two courses. So it could be the broth is one course, and then the vegetables or whatever else was in the soup could be part of the second course. We know that poor eat mostly starchy foods with maybe a little salted fish. In Haiti, okay, so 3 meals a day are common, except in Haiti, where two may be more common. And the typical breakfast, the typical Puerto Rican meals are breakfast, toast, coffee with eggs. That kind of is a Caribbean meal. There may be some meats thrown in different of the Caribbean island nations. Similar lunch and dinner, soup, stew served with rice and beans, fried plantains, chayote, squash. So we know what happens when there's a culturation, right? And we'll get to that. Okay, so um, special occasions, they're all going to be around religious holidays, right? Puerto Rico is a standout. It's going to have Thanksgiving, very similar to the United States. The non-religious events would be birthdays and Sunday meals. There's an emphasis on Sunday meals now, which are large. They're usually could be a picnic, and they're going to have fresh meats with the emphasis. The etiquette in Puerto Rico, the host initiates the meal with bon appetit. Um, in Cuba, Dominican Republic, and it's bien provejo. Okay, so the fork is going to be in the left hand, the knife is going to be in the right. There's no switching. When you're not eating, your hands are to remain visible. Let's look at therapeutic uses of food. Um, so some adhere to the hot and cold classification system, similar to Mexico. Okay, Puerto Ricans have added something called cool to that. Cool would be fruit, chicken, um, whole milk, and honey, among other things. Foods may be considered heavy or light. Breast milk can be considered too thick or too thin, and that's going to be addressed by foods as well. Some subscribe to food-based home remedies, specifically the Cubans, and combinations of foods. The book really goes into that quite a bit on the pages of 294 and 295 in the seventh, most recent edition. It's going to talk about foods that are going to be used to address common chronic illnesses. Okay, adaptations. Ingredients for Caribbean cuisine are readily available through Puerto Rico and Cuban American markets. So there's not a whole lot of change to the dietary intake, specifically, once again, among immigrants. Okay, so it remains the same. The only thing that may have changed somewhat is that there may be more animal products added to the diet. Caribbean islanders accept most American foods. Okay, frozen and dehydrated products definitely. Milk, meat, milk, soft drink consumption increases on the mainland. Of course, the mainland once again is the United States. Okay. Um, okay, a little bit more about that. Meal composition and cycle. So, Puerto Rican meals on the mainland are similar to those on the island with a few changes. The midday meal may be a sandwich and a soft drink. Sound familiar? And late dinner consists of rice, beans, starchy vegetable, meat if available, a soup, and may include in salad. Okay, so it's now the main meal, right? Preferred method of cooking is going to be frying first, boiling second, third is baking. Not a whole lot of grilling going on or broiling. Even if there is a broiler in the home, it may not be used. And so special occasions are added after immigration. All right, so you have all the West Indian Carnival, Puerto Rico Day, et cetera, et cetera. You also have reggae festivals now that commemorate Bob Marley's birthday. Okay, so the holiday food traditions continue even after immigration. All right, so there are health disparities for Hispanics compared to the general population. Although Puerto Rican and Cuban men have a lower mortality rate to white men, disproportionately young men die at higher rates. Okay, and it's usually, the book says, from curable or preventable diseases. High Puerto Rican infant mortality rate attributed to poverty and a young maternal age. Also, low educational attainment and maybe inadequate prenatal care. So, lower rates of preventative care going on. The healthcare insurance coverage may be an issue, although with Obamacare it's hard to say. And there are higher risk factors, and we're going to talk about that in just a few moments. Okay, so the rates of overweight and obesity are higher than the national average. Okay, and they are somewhat linked to acculturation. Okay, so when the traditional diet is altered, we start seeing some deficiencies in B1, right? B12, folate, sulfur amino acids. Okay, and then let's also talk a little bit about, there is a genetic contribution to metabolic syndrome. Okay, so metabolic syndrome is going to be the bringing together of certain factors such as obesity, diabetes, hypertension, and dyslipidemia. While the prevalence of hypertension is slightly lower than the white population, and remember, the white population is always going to be your population that you're comparing to because it's the dominant culture. Rates of mortality are higher, especially for men. Okay, and there's a reason for that. We'll talk about that in a moment. Heart disease is the leading cause of death. Renal failure due to diabetes, which is usually the cause of renal failure, 1.7 times higher than the white population, with death rate from diabetes 1.5 times higher than the white population. Chronic liver disease and cirrhosis is the sixth leading cause of death, and dental caries are an issue not just for pre-age school children, but for the population at large. Okay, so not a lot of dental care going on. Okay, so let's move to counseling. Language problems may make interviews difficult, not if you're a Spanish speaker. Health beliefs may differ from those of the provider, and access to medical care may be limited. So remember, we have this concept of God or fate determines your outcome. It's a sign of personal weakness if you are ill, and that is revealed to the family only, which is like a throwback to the previous slide where we talked a little bit about mortality rates. Silence. Caribbean Islanders use an expressive conversational style, so you don't have to worry about silence. It is uncommon. Direct eye contact is expected. Touching between same sex is definitely going to go on. It's very common. They may see men as doctors and women as nurses, and not a reversal of the roles. They tend to be present-oriented, so they're going to need scheduling flexibility. Medications may be altered to fit hot and cold theories, so you may have medications provided for hot illnesses that may have what would be cold remedies added to them, in fact diluting them. Food preferences are from the country of origin regardless of skin color, so don't make assumptions when someone with dark skin comes in that they may be preferring an African American cuisine, and they may not, okay? Many U.S. prescription medications are available over the counter or through the black market in Latin American countries, and the book does mention some medications that aren't available anymore. They've been taken off the market. They will be available in other countries, and they will possibly be used. And nutrition therapy may be tailored to the rich and the poor. In other words, rich people are used to eating certain foods, and poor people are not used to eating those foods. So you may want to be aware of their status when you're talking about their dietary intake. Okay? And an in-depth interview to determine acculturation, socioeconomic status, food intake, etc., is highly advisable. Okay? So that pretty much wraps up Caribbeans.